Just before we get started today, if you happen to enjoy our aviation-themed content here on this channel, we've got a new channel called Higher Learning that you might enjoy, in which the co-creator of Today I Found Out and author of many videos here, David Hiskey, flies around in his little plane and discusses all manner of interesting aviation-themed topics set to beautiful flying scenery. Check out Higher Learning in the link in the description below. And now today's video. In the annals of gambling history, the name Titanic Thompson is one treated with reverence and awe. This almost mythical figure became a legend in his own time for his ability to perform seemingly superhuman feats to win outrageous bets, from driving golf balls 500 yards to hurling lemons clear over 5-story buildings. Along with another well-known gambler, Thompson was also a highly skilled pool player and golfer, to the point that, given his propensity to beat some of the best in the world at golf, someone once suggested that he go pro. This was a suggestion Thompson dismissed because he couldn't afford the pay cut. The man who would eventually become known as the legendary Titanic Thompson was born with the decidedly less memorable name Alvin Clarence Thomas in rural Missouri. Some sources say Arkansas, as he lived on the border of the two states in 1893. Give or take, there's also some dispute about his precise birthday. Growing up in a small cabin in Arkansas, Thomas rarely attended school and spent little time at home, instead spending much of his youth throwing coins and playing cards with the other kids, becoming frighteningly adept at both. Even at a young age, he apparently quickly developed an eye for making bets, with one of his first hustles being to swindle a fisherman out of his prized pole. The story goes that at the tender age of 11, Thomas bet a local angler that his dog was smart enough to recognize and fetch a random rock thrown into a nearby river. The fisherman, intrigued, took Thomas up on his bet, and they agreed to draw a large X on the otherwise common-looking rock to ensure the dog brought the correct one. The angler then stood dumbstruck as Thomas threw the rock into the river several times, with his pet pooch being able to somehow sniff it out and fetch it back every single time. As per the terms of their bet, the angler handed over his fishing rod and left in a foul mood. Thomas then took the rod and sold it to a local store for a tidy profit. So, how did he do it? Well, unbeknownst to the fisherman, Thomas had spent the entire evening prior drawing large X's on hundreds of similar-looking rocks and throwing them into the water at approximately the same spot. Such shenanigans would become a hallmark of Thomas's later bets, though he didn't need to rely entirely on such underhanded tactics to win much of the time. Growing up in the rural backwoods of Arkansas, Thomas had countless hours to practice random skills that would become invaluable to him in later life, such as throwing horseshoes, shooting targets, and skimming stones, all of which gave him a near unparalleled ability to throw objects with pinpoint accuracy over large distances. Thomas also dealt himself thousands of poker and blackjack hands and became adept at intuiting the probability of certain hands, and for good measure taught himself to deal cards from the bottom of the deck for no particular reason. Skills and moral flexibility in hand, Thomas reportedly left home at the age of 16, telling his mother he was going to find his father, a gambler himself, who'd skipped out on them a few years earlier, leaving them destitute. Despite being unable to read or write properly, Thomas's mother was confident in her son's future and wished him well, only asking him to promise to never drink or smoke, a promise he kept, being a teetotaler until the day he died. From that point on, Thomas worked a number of odd jobs throughout the American South, ironically, given his lack of formal education, even selling encyclopedias door to door. The most lucrative part of these jobs was not so much the direct money that he earned from them, but getting more or less paid to travel and meet people. As for paying for hotels, it is noted that, a lover of the finer things in life, Thompson often scored himself free nights in the finest hotels by betting he could throw the key to his room into the room's accompanying pigeonhole, offering to pay double if he missed. Thanks to his excellent hand-eye coordination and throwing abilities, Thompson apparently generally did not have to pay for his lodging. Also, while traveling, he naturally took the opportunity to fleece the residents of any town or city he visited as well, using his impressive repertoire of skills along with a fair amount of trickery when the situation warranted. It's also noted that Thomas would announce his arrival to every town he visited by walking into the first saloon he found and loudly asking, "Does anyone know a gambler named Lee Thomas?" in the hopes of finding his father. On this one, we should point out that Thomas actually did get to randomly meet his estranged father in 1910 in Oil City, finding him dealing cards in the corner of a smoky bar. Thomas then proceeded to win about $3,600, about $92,000 today, from his father, before announcing himself as his son, handing the money back and telling the old man he never had a chance. After this, Thomas once again hit the road, honing his craft before being called up for military service in 1918. Already a crack shot from his youth, firing endless rounds at targets, because Thomas reportedly could fire a shot through a silver dollar at a remarkable distance and often displayed the skill to win bets, he was ultimately promoted to the rank of sergeant and was tasked with training recruits in marksmanship. A few months later, when the war ended, he was discharged and decided to return home to visit his mother. During the brief visit, Thomas bought his mother a house with the cash that he reportedly had recently won from card games with other soldiers. While you might think that this would put a dent in his net worth, it didn't in the slightest at the time. In fact, at just 26 years old, Thomas had so much money that before he hit the road again, he had to warn the bank that he was going to be making a rather large withdrawal because he had more money in his account than they usually kept on hand. After extracting the funds, Thomas once again hit the road, becoming a legend among gamblers for his impossible apparent luck, skill, and sheer bravado. As to some more specific examples of a physically imposing figure, one of Thomas's favorite bets was that he could throw a random object, usually a small walnut or piece of fruit, over a several-story high building. You, like so many people he won this bet of, might be thinking such a light object could never be thrown that far, and you'd probably be right. Except Thomas's trick was to weigh down the item with lead shot beforehand, allowing him to send it sailing over the building in question. Perhaps the most famous example of this trick was used by Thomas against Al Capone. Yes, that Al Capone. After a night of cards with the gangster, Thomas bet him that he could throw a lemon over a 5-story building. Capone, being well aware of Thomas's tricks, picked a lemon himself from a nearby cart and squeezed all the juice out of it and bade him to use that one. Thomas took the lemon from Capone and ultimately agreed to toss it. He subsequently hurled it into the lower stratosphere, earning him about $500, it's about $6,500 today, from the feared gangland figure. Capone told Thomas in no uncertain terms that the feat had earned him his respect, completely unaware that the lemon had been subtly switched by one of Thomas's associates and the one he actually threw had been filled with some buckshot. However, Thomas's real skill was golf, something he became frighteningly adept at while playing in San Francisco in the 1920s. Hustling became the name of his game. Naturally left-handed, Thomas taught himself to play right-handed and was effectively ambidextrous at the sport, and would thus frequently win bets at golf right-handed, then offer to go double or nothing, playing with his supposed bad side, left-handed. His skill eventually saw him being challenged even by future Golf Hall of Famers who generally walked away humbled and with a terminal injury to the wallet. Perhaps the most famous golfer to lose to Thomas was Bobby Jones, a man generally agreed to be one of the finest golfers in history. As a testament to his skill, Thomas would frequently beat his opponents by only 1 or 2 strokes, in some cases deliberately handicapping himself, thus making it easier to goad them into another round for money. When this didn't work, Thomas would sometimes volunteer to physically handicap himself to lure in potential marks, reportedly beating opponents wearing everything from a sling to a blindfold, with perhaps his most brazen example of skill being the time he turned up and won while playing in a wheelchair. On one occasion, as referenced previously, Thomas was asked why on earth he hadn't gone pro, to which he infamously replied, "I could not afford the cut in pay." Though undeniably cocky, Thomas's statement was fairly accurate. At a time when pro golfers could possibly earn somewhere in the region of $30,000, that's about $450,000 today a year, Thomas could earn that much in a month hustling rich golfers. On this note, along with winning in straight matches, he was a fan of challenging individuals with entirely too much money in their pockets to driving contests. The most famous example of which is the time on one wintry morning that he bet an entire group of golfers $500 each, about $7,000 today, that he could drive a ball 500 yards, a near impossible feat even by today's standards. As soon as the bet was struck, Thomas turned around and drove his ball onto a nearly frozen lake and watched as the ball bounced across it for an estimated mile. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Noteworthy in all this was that it was during the height of his golfing career in the 1930s and 40s that the papers accidentally misprinted the hustler's name as Thompson in an article about his prowess at the sport. Liking that it gave him a degree of anonymity, Thomas began referring to himself as Thompson from that point on. This name would later become Titanic Thompson after he bet a group of pool players that he could leap all the way over the table. After doing that, one gambler quipped that Thompson should call himself Titanic, given how it sunk them all. The nickname stuck and became the name he'd been known by for the rest of his life. With money, however, came enemies. And throughout his life, Thompson had to kill a reported 5 men in self-defense. With these, he shot 4 and killed one with a hammer when the assailant threatened his girlfriends at the time with a knife. In the case of the first 4 killings, each one was either a known criminal trying to rob Titanic or a mugger, and thus Thompson was allowed to walk free. In the case of the latter, though, Thompson was given a choice: go to jail or hand over the deeds to his boat to the state to make the case go away. Thompson chose the latter. Speaking of murder, Thompson also played a part in the highly publicized murder case of Arnold Rothstein, the kingpin of the so-called Jewish mafia in the late 1920s, taking part in the fixed card game that prompted the debt that directly resulted in Rothstein's assassination. At the subsequent trial, Thompson famously answered the question of what he did for a living by stating, "I play a little golf for money." Despite his knack for skill-based games and the fact that he made tens of millions of dollars throughout his life, Thompson's rather high-spending lifestyle, penchant for gambling on horse racing with much less success, and with little regard to saving, ultimately left him penniless in his final years when traveling around was no longer quite as feasible. As a result, he lived out his last years in a rest home, though he never let his spark for proposition bets die and could reportedly be found at a local mini-golf course hustling people over $2 games well into his 70s. Nobody can live forever, however, and Thompson died in 1974 at the age of around 80. According to local legend, upon hearing the news, some old pros at a nearby golf club are said to have had the following exchange with their caddy. "You ever know Titanic Thompson, boy?" "Can't say that I did, sir." "But you say he's dead?" "That's what I heard." "Well, son, likely he is dead, but take my advice and don't go betting any money on it."